Hello and welcome to Strategic News International. I'm Parul Chandra and I have with me today the President of the Tibetan Government-in-Exile, Dr Lobsang Sangay. Welcome to SNI, Dr Sangay. Let me begin by asking you, the Chinese President is in town even as we talk, and he'll be meeting Prime Minister Modi for the second informal summit between India and China. Now, you may see it as a hypothetical question, but what if you were to meet President Xi Jinping? What would you tell him about Tibet?
Well, normally we don't answer hypothetical questions. But I think President Xi Jinping should look at the situation in Tibet and realize that 60 years of occupation and 60 years of repression of Tibetans is not working, because 153 Tibetans have committed self-immolations. So many protests and resistance are going on. As we speak, Yashinga nunnery with 5,000 to 6,000 nuns was demolished and reduced to half. With all these things happening, the hardline policies of the Chinese government is not working. So we have to sit down and peacefully resolve the issue of Tibet. So dialogue is the only way. So hence, dialogue between the envoys of the Dalai Lama and representative of the Chinese government is the way to solve the issue of Tibet. So that's the message.
You've spoken about the need for a dialogue, but there hasn't been a dialogue between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese authorities for nearly a decade now. The last time they met was, I think, in 2010. And there has been no contact since. So why have the talks broken down?
From our side, we are willing and ready anytime, anywhere to have dialogue. Now, you need two hands to clap. We have extended our hand. It is for the Chinese government to reciprocate in kind, so that the envoys of the Dalai Lama can meet with Chinese government's representative and discuss issues, and solve it.
Have there been any kind of back-channel talks in the meantime?
Informally, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very popular in the Buddhist world. And China happens to be the largest Buddhist country in the world. So a lot of Chinese do come to Dharamsala to seek his teachings. So they come and, in their personal capacities as Buddhist followers, some business people, some journalists and researchers, they keep coming and meeting us. And we are transparent, we are always open. We share our views on Tibet with them as we do with the rest of the world.
Now let me take you to the issue of the successor of the Dalai Lama. It's been in the news for quite some time now. Who will be the successor of the Dalai Lama? Especially because the Chinese have been saying that they will get to choose the successor. They're citing historical precedents and they're claiming a right over it, whereas the Dalai Lama himself and you as well have said that His Holiness will be choosing the successor.
No, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very healthy, and he will live for a few decades to come. So he'll be with us for a long time. But then we believe in the tradition of reincarnation. So it is for the Dalai Lama to decide on his reincarnation and nobody else, because it's his reincarnation, So the Chinese government can claim and try whatever they want to, but it will never work. Number one, Chinese government doesn't have credibility. All they have done in the last 60 years is destroyed monasteries, demolished nunneries, disrobe monks and nuns, and criticized and vilified His Holiness Dalai Lama for the last 6 decades, right? Why would they want to select a reincarnation of a vilified person, Moreover, reincarnation was invented by Tibetans centuries ago. This is an original idea of Tibetan peoples, and we have full copyright and patent over it. And Chinese government, as the manufacturing hub of the world, cannot duplicate this. So Chinese government has no business on this. It is for the Tibetan people to decide and His Holiness the Dalai Lama to decide.
But is there a possibility of having 2 Dalai Lamas then, where the Chinese government will probably choose their own Dalai Lama, whereas the Tibetans or His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama?
They could, they could, but it will be a fake Dalai Lama, If you read the history of Vatican, there has been few fake Dalai popes or fake, what they call anti-popes. So it's not uncommon. The powers, the emperors, the kings of Europe tried to impose their own popes. Similarly, if you study other religious tradition and powers and the kings, they try to impose their own. But ultimately, people, the followers, the faithful, will believe in the one who they have selected and who they believe, So Chinese government cannot impose anything on Tibetans with their guns or tanks.
Let me now ask you about another issue, and that is about the Panchen Lama. Now, he has been missing since he was a 5-year-old, since 1995, and he went missing soon after he was chosen as the next Panchen Lama. And the Chinese authorities are supposed to be behind his disappearance. What would you say on this matter?
Yeah, we just celebrated, 30th birthday of Panchen Lama. So it's been almost 25 years he has disappeared. Even the UN Committee on Disappearance have registered him as someone who has disappeared. Clearly, after he was recognized as the Panchen Lama, Chinese government intervened and took him away, so essentially kidnapped him. And for the last 2 decades and more, we don't know where he lives, even whether he's alive or not. So this is the action of the Chinese government, which is unacceptable. We want to know where the Panchen Lama is, whether he's getting traditional and spiritual education or not. We don't know whether he is well or not. We want to know all these things, and he should be released.
Now, the departure of the Karmapa also has been a matter of controversy. He came to India as a 15-year-old. He was here until last year, till he went off to the US. And the Indian government seems quite unhappy about it. He wanted to come back for a brief period, and his visa application was rejected by the Indian government. What are your comments on this issue? Is he likely to return to India? Does he want to return to India?
Yeah, during the time when he fled Tibet and sought refuge in India, initial years, he had some issues. He had some experience which was not necessarily positive from his point of view. But the last 5 years, before he went to the US, was getting better. Indian government relaxed a lot of restrictions on his mobility. He went to Arunachal, now he can go to Sikkim. So a lot has improved. So in that context, I think, we believe that, the best place for Karmapa is India, and this should be his base. And from this place, he should carry on the message of Dharma around the world, and hopefully he will return. So that has been our hope.
But the Indian government seems to have suspicions about the Karmapa.
No, I think it's not Indian government per se. Generally, as I said, if you look at pre-2017, Indian government has lifted his restrictions to move around all over India. And in fact, he went to Arunachal Pradesh as well. So those suspicions and those restrictions were lifted, But there are some lingering issues. I do think these are minor issues. It can be resolved if, parties talk to each other and resolve it, yeah.
Do you think they are talking? Because he's already taken the citizenship of the Dominican Republic.
Passport of Dominican Republic for his convenience, because it's quite difficult to travel around with what we call IC,
Identity certificate for Tibetans. Now, let me bring you to another issue, and this is concerning India and Tibetans. India, of course, has sheltered Tibetans for more than 5 decades now. But there is a certain sense that India has not been able to leverage Tibet or the Tibet card with the Chinese. Would you agree with that?
Well, people do talk about Tibet card. I don't know where that is, you know. And yes, we do feel India at large and leaders of India should look at Tibet as one of their core issues. We always talk about border between India and China. Actually, it's a border between Tibet and India. You know, the demarcation, the McMahon line, which is the preferred border of India, was actually signed by the Tibetan Prime Minister and Tibetan government in 1914. There's a famous Simla Convention of Pakistan, but actually the Simla Convention on Tibet is equally famous and perhaps more consequential, because the longest border from Kashmir to Arunachal was demarcated by Tibetan Prime Minister representing the government of Tibet in 1914. So, all these are very important for India, and so we need to solve this. And India and China are facing each other after Tibet was occupied, right? So Tibet as a buffer zone was very helpful in maintaining peace and stability. Now, after the occupation of Tibet, China has come. Now they have become what they call weather-tested friends with Pakistan. Their presence in Nepal, their influence in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all this happened after Tibet was occupied. So India should clearly see Tibet as a major issue that needs to be resolved peacefully.
I've heard you speak in the past, and you've spoken very eloquently about the fact that India seems to have lost ground on its claims over Buddhism, whereas China is stealing India's thunder. They are portraying themselves as the benefactors of Buddhism. They have put in millions of dollars to develop Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Buddha, and you have expressed your concern about it in the past.
Yeah, I know. India is land of Buddhism. All the holy sites where Buddha taught, got enlightened and passed away, all the most sacred sites of Buddhism are in India. Now we talk about hard power, soft power, smart power. India has Buddhism as a soft power. It's a low-hanging fruit, It's about to fall off, and all India needs to do is pick it, But then, in this context also, China is way ahead. In fact, 2 decades ahead. For example, World Buddhist Congress, which is the oldest organization of Buddhist leaders. It's being hosted by China so many times that many Buddhist leaders think China is the leader of Buddhist world. It's odd.
Sadly for India.
But, India is ready-made, So hence, Indian people and leaders should realize, take this low-hanging fruit and lead, and everybody will follow, And then now we estimate anywhere from 600 to 800 million Buddhists around the world. It's a huge population. So it is for the taking,
I also wanted to ask you about the state of human rights in Tibet. You did mention it in your initial remarks, but what is going on in Tibet as far as the reports you're getting are concerned?
Freedom House comes with Freedom Index every year, which measures the level of freedom. Tibet has been listed as the least free country in the whole world after Syria. We know what's going on in Syria, whole world knows. But how many people know that the least free or most repressed region in the whole world is Tibet? So 153 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. Thousands are in prison in Tibet. Thousands are abused. So many surveillance, grid system, restrictions are imposed on Tibetans. Tibetan language, Tibetan culture is discouraged, and Tibetan monasteries are demolished. Environmental destruction is happening. Economic marginalization of Tibetans are happening. and blatant discriminations of Tibetans in any kind of hierarchy or power. The top leaders are always Chinese, you know, in Tibet. So you can clearly see all these things are happening, and hence Freedom House indexes right. Tibet is the least free region in the whole world after Syria.
Is the demographic composition of Tibet also changing? Are they settling in more and more Han Chinese in the region?
They are trying, and they have succeeded in other places of China, you know. But in Tibet, thousands of Chinese are moving in, but because of the altitude of Tibet, you know, Chinese are not able to settle there throughout the year, because they are mostly there in summer, but in winter, Tibet is Tibetan majority. Now, as we speak now, thousands of Chinese have to move back home because Tibet is getting very cold.
You've spoken about the middle way as a means of settlement of the Tibetan issue, where there will be autonomy, but Tibet will still remain a part of China. Do you see this happening in your lifetime?
Of course. During my lifetime, so many things happened. Berlin Wall came down. Nelson Mandela got freed. Aung San Suu Kyi got freed. East Timor got its independence. Northern Ireland got resolved. Just in my lifetime. Tibet is next. That's what we believe, and it will happen, thanks to India and Indian people.
What kind of support are you getting from the world community? You travel the world seeking their support, but again, there are certain countries or leaders who do avoid you at times.
There are some who avoid me. There are some who will meet with me. But then after some time, those who avoid me will come to meet with you, and those who meet with me now will avoid me. That's the way it is, you know. That's why it's called struggle. So you have to keep struggling till you get there.
Does it have anything to do with the fact that China is a growing economic power and also
it's money power, it's military
country?
power.
Yes.
Moral is compromise, you know, for money. That's the reality. But having said that, there are many people who are moral oriented. So I'm going to Czech Republic, and I think the Czech Senate will officially host me. And then there are other countries. Recently I was US Congress, they officially hosted me for the first time. So there are countries, you know, where the morality is gaining ground and they support you. So you keep traveling, you keep your issue alive, and you know, you have your heart of a Tibetan and carry the Tibetan flag wherever you go till it's hosted in Tibet.
Thank you so much for talking to SNI, Dr. Sangay.
Thank you so much.